Shall we start?
Yeah, we ready.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be joining with you here today. My name is Dr. Conrad. It's a privilege to be part of Loud Cry International, and I'm very excited about a series of discussions for our members. And this is the first of a series of regular discussions that will appear online, open for all of our LCI members, as we seek to be a place where new ministries can be nurtured, new ministries can thrive, people with ministry ideas can find fellowship and mentorship with people who may be a bit further along the path in active ministry. And so today, my presentation is, I've entitled it Avoiding Ministry Icebergs. But what I want to do is to really give an overview from my experience of the four stages that a ministry goes through during its growth process. And as I go through this presentation, I hope and pray that you will see your ministry one of these four stages, and will be able to identify to grow to the next stage of ministry, what it's going to take, and some of the concerns that you may want to take account of, and so that you can avoid ministry icebergs. And so I'd wonder, maybe let's bow our heads and begin with a word of prayer, and then we will get underway. Our dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you that you've called us to be your witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. Lord, I thank you that you gave these concentric circles, that you gave this vision that ministry should be local, it should be national, and it should be global. And I thank you, Lord, that there is nothing that you cannot do through the life of someone who is wholly consecrated to you and who is filled with your Spirit. So, Lord, as we share this time together, as I share this presentation, we have a Q&A and dialogue afterwards, I ask that you give us wisdom and understanding, and that all those who watch will be blessed, and that their own ministries will grow and thrive and be a witness shining for you in earth's darkest hours. Thank you, Father, for hearing this prayer. In Jesus' name I ask. Amen.
Amen.
So, as we begin this presentation, I just want to make it clear, I'm not an attorney, and not an attorney. I did some law classes at school, business law, commercial law, contract law in the UK. But I've spent most of my life in the non-profit sector, and most of it actually in administration and senior leadership roles, whether it be in the UK Health Service, in a hospital setting, whether it was with ADRA, working in leadership roles in country offices all around the world, whether it was in the Middle East Union as the Secretary-Treasurer, pastoring, or being the President of Adventist Frontier Missions for the last 15 plus years. And now, since April last year, 2025, it's been my privilege to start a new ministry called As a Needle to the Pole. And we've grown from zero to we now have a growing footprint all around the world in social media of sermons and Bible studies, seeking to prepare people to meet Jesus when he comes again. And so what I want to share with you today is based on those 3+ decades of practical experience in church ministry, in ministry development, in starting projects and closing projects down, in helping projects to become financially and economically sustainable in different parts of the world. And so this presentation really charts the four stages of a ministry's growth. And you may see yourself at one of these four stages. But my prayer is, as we look at these four stages, we're going to see where we are in our own chapter of ministry in what we're doing today. So there are really, as I see it, four stages of ministry growth that anybody who wants to get involved in active ministry may have. And the first is an active church ministry. That is within a department in your local church, such as a health ministries department, or a religious liberty department, or a personal ministries department, or the school board, for instance. And the second option is where you grow beyond your local church, or maybe your local church doesn't feel it has the capacity to support the ministry you're engaging in. And that's when you're going to you're going to grow into an active personal ministry. And then option 3 is where that personal ministry grows to the place where you need to incorporate as a non-profit within your state. And I'm going to look at some of the pros and the cons of that, and some of the things to take into account when you're when you're thinking of making this next step of faith and step of ministry. And then finally, I'm going to look at the 501c nonprofit state and just some of the areas to be thinking about to avoid common ministry pitfalls, and when will be the right time for you to think about adopting such a ministry strategy by incorporating as filing with the IRS to get a 501c3 nonprofit status. So those are the 4 options we're going to go through today. I just want to emphasize at the beginning that there is no better option than another. Intrinsically, neither of these options is morally or qualitatively more important in the eyes of God, but there are stages of ministry growth that relate to where you are in your ministry and the gifts that God has given you, and whether you want it to be done something in your local community or whether you want it to have a nationwide impact or just across your state, for instance, and the amount of time and labor that it's going to take to operate such a ministry. So we're going to focus first on active church ministry. And what I'm doing for each of these 4 options, I'm going to be looking at some dimensions of ministry on the left-hand column, and then I've got my comments on the right-hand column, just things to be thinking about. So in the terms of dimensions of ministry, in terms of God's calling and leading, if you're asked to serve in your local church, you need to prayerfully consider this, particularly at nominating committee time. And you need to ask yourself, is God opening a door for me to engage in a ministry? Maybe you're in a church and you're looking for a ministry option, but you're not sure what you want to do. Maybe you just want to get involved and you're going to say, Lord, please lead me to a ministry team where I can use my gifts for your glory. And so you're asking yourself, is God opening a door to ministry? Is he giving you any divine appointments that would suggest this is the path he wants you to take? And is the nominating committee prayerfully considering your name and recommending you for participation in a church department? Then the next dimension of ministry is personal giftedness and interest. If you are asked to serve in a local church ministry, you need to reflect on who you are as a person, your life experiences. Do you have a burden on your heart for this kind of ministry? So, for instance, if you have a burden on your heart for education, it makes sense for you to maybe be involved on the church board or in the Parent Teachers Association, rather than being involved in maybe a lifestyle or wellness kind of programming ministry. You need to consider your personal spiritual gifts, your spiritual maturity, and your technical and your professional abilities. Do you bring a unique set of abilities, technical skills, professional knowledge that's going to lift a certain department within your church? And it may well be that you've had some painful experiences in your life. Maybe you've gone through a divorce. Maybe you've gone through the death of a child, maybe a stillborn a child. Maybe you've gone through an abortion in your earlier years. Maybe you've had a long-term battle with depression, or you've overcome cancer. Whatever it may be, and very oftentimes it's those painful experiences in our lives actually serve as a very meaningful springboard to ministry to others. Because only when you have truly walked that mile can you understand and empathize with somebody who is about to make the same journey that you've already successfully navigated. And then you need to look at the reproducibility of ministry. As a general rule, within local congregations, there's a very narrow geographical focus for a congregation's ministry department. If you're in a certain town or city, almost inevitably your focus is going to be on that community and nobody else. And for local church departments, in terms of reproducibility, you're really reliant on the enthusiasm of your local volunteers who bring various skill and knowledge levels. And I can tell you from experience that managing volunteers is often harder than it is to manage paid personnel. And so with a local church ministry, the focus tends to be local, and there's very limited opportunity for a ministry to go statewide or to go national or even international. When it comes to the next dimensions of ministry, we're looking at ministry financial expectations. If you're asked to serve in a local church, are there any capital requirements? So, for instance, if you're asked to serve in a lifestyle immersion program team, the church is going to have to put together a budget, what it's going to cost to run this. If you want to do a family enrichment weekend every 6 months in your church, what is the cost going to be? And are there going to be any regular income requirements to make this work? And when you're working in your local church, the one thing you have to consider at all times are the other spending needs of the church. Is this ministry that you want to engage in under the umbrella of a local church department? Is it a high priority for your congregation, or do they already have prior commitments which maybe they're struggling to meet, and they don't want to take on any additional financial commitments? So you may have an idea for a youth ministry program, but the church board says, well, we're struggling to keep the school going, so we're not going to support a new youth ministry when we can't keep the school going as it is. So this is one of the challenges of working within a local church context. And then there's the personal time commitment. Within local church departments, we have, you might say, the Pareto rule, the Pareto analysis, that within a regular church department, about 80% of the work is done by 20% of the team members. Generally speaking, those who are willing, those who have giftedness, a heavy burden falls upon them, and many of the other members of the committee may view themselves as being more in an advisory capacity rather than taking an active personal role within this new ministry. In church ministry tends to be conducted in your spare time. So people, they get home from work, and maybe 1 or 2 evenings a week, they will commit to supporting and engaging in that local church ministry. And for this reason, it's very hard for such a ministry to grow, because it's very hard to gain consistent support from an entirely volunteer team. And so what ends up happening is when a church has a ministry, it will either have a very intense burst of activity, like, for instance, a vacation Bible school, where the volunteers are needed every night for 5 straight nights, but they're not going to sustain that level of commitment year round, but they will just for a 5-night VBS program. Or you may go to something like a monthly program, like the first Sunday of a month, to do maybe a men's ministry meeting, because with volunteers, you really can't ask for much more than that. And then you have the question of legal liability. And as a general rule, all ministry activities within your church must be approved by the church board. This ensures that there is a broader review of the activities. People have asked hard questions. Have you thought through this ministry activity? And it also ensures that your activities are covered by your local conference's general liability insurance policies. And so there is ascending liability to the conference and possibly to the union for local church activities. And so that is why we want to have board approval. And sometimes the board will modify what you want to do. Sometimes the board will say what you want to do is too risky. We don't want to approve of this. And so the activity won't take place under the umbrella of the church. And then in terms of legal liability, in local church departments, there are often and more often these days, background checks are required for participation. And of course, we live in a low trust world where nobody trusts anybody. So many members don't want to go through background checks, not because they have something to hide, but because they just don't want the conference looking over their background information. And so background checks are becoming increasingly a difficult area to navigate when we're trying to protect our children within our church, which I think should be our top priority, vis-a-vis the privacy and the confidentiality concerns that many members legitimately have regarding to background checks. And then we come to the last of the screens here on active church ministry. If you look at the technical and professional skill requirements, as a general rule in local church ministry, there is not normally any formal professional or technical qualifications are needed, but sometimes you do require very specific technical or professional skills. So, for instance, if your church does a dental mission trip, or if your church does an evangelism trip to some other country, within which you want to include free healthcare, free dental care, as well as some construction and VBS and evangelism activities, then there will be the need within your local church ministry function for professional or technical skills. And when it comes to nonprofit management experience, there is a very, very low threshold for people serving in active church ministry. By and large, we work with a coalition of the willing, regardless of how able they may happen to be. And so when we run local church departments, we're often relying on the presence of one of maybe the head elder or one of the pastors within our local committee for whatever ministry we're running, to ensure that we're thinking things through, we've asked the right questions, we've assessed the risks, and we have a reasonable idea of what the ministry is actually going to look like, its goals and its strategies and its deliverables. When it comes to incorporation as nonprofit, this simply doesn't apply for local active church ministry in a local church department. And 501c3 status is not a question that you raise within a local church department and ministry function. And when it comes to the question of going to scale, and by this I mean, can you reproduce this ministry so it happens all across your state and maybe all across your region of the US and maybe one day all across the United States of America? So for instance, something like Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous or Gamblers Anonymous, which are nationwide programs. Well, essentially it's impossible for a local church departmental ministry to go to scale and to really be reproducible, even oftentimes even within your state, let alone across the entire nation. When it comes to your livelihood, within a local church department, you tend to maintain your regular livelihood, your regular income and expense patterns, and you're essentially providing volunteer capacity, volunteer involvement, and maybe voluntary leadership for a local church ministry department. And on average, it may be 5 to 10 hours a month of volunteer service within a very, very limited geographical scope. Now, why would we engage in this kind of ministry? One, because we do want to bless our local community. And two, when we engage in local ministry, we get to know our community, and that really helps us with local evangelism and building meaningful friendships within our local community that will support church growth. But there are times when the ministry needs to grow, and I've called this active personal ministry. And this is the next stage of the growth of a ministry. And in all honesty, sometimes people skip option one entirely. They have a burden, they have an idea, and they say, we're going to start an active personal ministry anyway that doesn't necessarily fall under the umbrella of our local church, and it hasn't been set in place by the nominating committee on our local church board. So when it comes to God's calling and leading for active personal ministry, again, you're asking yourself, is God opening a door to ministry here? Has God given you divine appointments? Do you see God's providence leading you to an active personal ministry? And this active personal ministry is a ministry that is really possible only outside the framework of your local congregation. This is no longer a ministry that exists within the umbrella of your local congregation, but this may be something that God has given you a burden for. So, just recently, somebody called me and they said, we recently met with some prisoners and we discovered that they had children living in poverty. And so we decided to do something about it, and we started putting Christmas parcels together for the prisoners of children. And then some people said, we want to help with that. And then it started growing and growing and growing. And this wasn't taking place under the umbrella of a local church, but it was something that God was blessing as an active personal ministry directly for these two individuals. So when it comes to personal giftedness and interest, again, you're asking yourself, if you're going to engage in an active personal ministry, what are your personal spiritual gifts? What is your level of spiritual maturity? And what are your technical and professional abilities? Do you have a burden on your heart that would lead you to this kind of ministry? And do you have any previous life experience that has prepared you for this kind of ministry? Maybe you are a cancer survivor, and now you want to run maybe a support group for people with the kind of cancer that you've overcome yourself. And then you need to ask yourself, particularly once we're moving beyond local church ministry into personal ministry, how united is your family in general? And if you have a spouse, then your spouse in particular with you in this ministry vision. Because once you move from ministry within a local church department to a personal ministry that you're starting to run directly yourself, normally from your basement or your home office or your garage, this is going to start impacting your family. And you need to ask yourself, how united is my family with me in this ministry vision? So then you come to the question of whether this ministry is reproducible. And so you need to ask yourself, can you do this ministry on your own? Or do you need volunteer support? Are your family members able and willing to chip in and help out when needed? Do you have friends who share the same burden as you and they're willing to step up and step out in faith with you into this new kind of ministry? And for these kinds of ministries, you need to ask, is the growth of this ministry limited by any fixed factors? So, for instance, you may have a personal skill set that is so unique that this ministry can only be done by you. Or, for instance, you may be, a cardiac surgeon, and you feel a burden to do cardiac surgery for disadvantaged communities in Bangladesh. There's very, very few people who can take part in such a ministry. And so this ministry is going to be very, very focused. It's going to be based on very, very high-level technical and professional skills, and that's going to exclude most people from how the ministry is going to operate. So then you look at financial expectations. And when it comes to active personal ministry that is not under the umbrella of your local church, you then need to be asking the more direct financial questions, such as what are the capital requirements? Does this ministry require investment? Do you need to get some land? Do you need to rent a storefront in a local town? Do you need some money to repair or not upgrade a building or a piece of equipment? And what are going to be the ongoing income requirements? And it's worth putting together maybe a 1 or 2 year income projections with a spreadsheet month by month, and be honest with yourself about where the money is going to come from to pay for this kind of ministry activity. And so, as this is not directly supported by your local church, you need to ask yourself, is this ministry going to be a high priority for myself and my family, given our other spending needs? Do we have a sick child? Are we looking after an elderly relative? Are we battling long-term medical challenges with high ongoing medical expenses? And so is this a financial commitment that I and my family, that we are willing to take on together? And so you're starting to discuss questions of family attitude to risk-taking, to the use of savings, a willingness to go into debt, maybe to kickstart a new ministry. And so is your family willing and able to invest any personal assets to kickstart this ministry? And, it's often easier to start a personal ministry that has got low capital requirements, startup requirements, such as maybe a counseling ministry. But there are other kinds of ministries, such as maybe setting up a soup kitchen, where you maybe need to expand your kitchen. Maybe you need a larger vehicle to transport the food supplies every weekend to where you're going, and that will require capital investment to get this ministry up and running. And so you need to ask yourself, really, if you're going to branch out into active personal ministry, not under the umbrella of your church, but do you have a way to sustain this ministry for the first 12 months of operation without gaining sustaining donor support? Are you able to start something? Are you able to turn a vision into reality? Do you have the capital, the savings maybe, or access to funds so that maybe you have startup funding for 1 year minimum? So that you can show something is working. And when you show that something is working, it's easier to attract donor interest at that moment. And what is your experience in donor ministry and fundraising? There are some people who hate fundraising. For them, it's an incredibly stressful experience. There are some cultures, such as the South Korean culture, where it's considered shameful to ask somebody else for financial support. And so you may be working in a culture here in North America where it's considered embarrassing or shameful to ask for support, or your parents may be shamed by you speaking in a church and sharing the vision and asking for people to share in the vision with you and help with the finances. So when you're thinking of starting a personal ministry, you need to ask yourself and be honest with yourself, how ready and willing are you to raise funds for this and to speak in churches and to get this up and running? And when it comes to personal time commitment, and I know this from personal experience, this is no longer the 80-20 rule of you working with a bunch of other volunteers in a church department. When you're looking at active personal ministry, then really there's the 100% rule, which is the buck stops with you. And if you don't get it done, it's not going to get done. And so with active personal ministry, the work tends to fall onto a very, very few set of shoulders, maybe you and two or three, or even maybe one other key colleague. And so you need to ask yourself, do you have the time needed to make this ministry successful? This is no longer something maybe 5 hours a week or a month of voluntary service for a local church department. Now the question is, you need to put in whatever time is needed to make this ministry successful at any time of the year. And so now you're asking some harder questions. Do you really have family support and willingness to sacrifice your presence to this ministry? Are your family willing for you to spend time maybe away from home once or twice a month to sustain this ministry? And so these are some hard questions you need to ask within your families. When it comes to legal liability, because this is not covered by church legal umbrella and general liability insurance from the local conference, you need to ask yourself some basic questions. Does your ministry incur any obvious liabilities, such as giving out meals or medical interventions or ministry involving minors? And so do you need to have insurance? Do you need to have general liability insurance? And if you do, then maybe you need to think about incorporating and running the ministry under the umbrella of a non-profit for which you can buy general liability insurance. It's easier to do that than for yourself personally. Do you have the financial resources to cover potential claims? And at this stage, now that you're no longer under the umbrella of the church, but this is a personal ministry, normally no background checks are required for participation, because you don't have any formal organization in place that would require that for any staff or volunteers engaged in the ministry. And when it comes to technical and professional skills, once again, you may occasionally have very specific technical and professional skills, such as a dental mission trip. So you may be a dentist, you may be a physical therapist, you may be a nurse practitioner, for instance, or you may be an ophthalmologist, and you want to engage in ministry that uses your professional skills. But as a general rule, even for active personal ministry projects, very few professional or technical qualifications are actually needed. But what is important is that you bring knowledge and abilities from your regular livelihood, your day job. Those become very important because most people want to minister where they already have strengths and abilities. It is very hard to find anybody who feels a burden from the Lord to start to engage in a ministry where they really have almost zero knowledge and abilities relating to how to operationalize that kind of ministry vision. So understanding your professional and technical background is really important because that's going to give you an idea of the kind of ministry that you're able to engage in. When it comes to nonprofit management experience, the valuable thing about engaging in active personal ministry, that is before you may be incorporated as a nonprofit in your state, is that this kind of ministry still takes place at a very low level in terms of size. You're intimately involved in the ministry as the leader, and this gives you invaluable experience in frontline ministry delivery. You get to know what works for this kind of ministry and the kind of outreach or services that this ministry is engaged in. And so this allows you, while it's engaged in a personal ministry chapter or phase of growth, to really refine your ministry's mission, objectives, and strategies. You're learning what pitfalls to avoid. You're learning what works with volunteers and what doesn't. You're learning maybe what technological infrastructure you need, what apps you may need to use. You're also, in these early days of personal ministry, you're looking for God to open doors for you, and you're looking prayerfully for new opportunities for ministry growth as God leads. So you may want to have a vision to do A, B, and C for the Lord, but God actually shifts you to B, C, and D, or C, D, and E. And so in this personal ministry phase, because there's no organization holding you back, there's no board of directors requiring monthly or quarterly reports, you can experiment, you can try new ideas, you can look for partnerships that add lift to your ministry and add value to your delivery. And so as you go through this stage of ministry growth, you're developing a much deeper self-awareness of your personal capacity and your personal limitations and what you like doing and what you don't like doing. So, for instance, sometimes people set up a ministry and they really love the frontline delivery aspect of that. But as ministries grow, so the founder tends to take a step back through time and they move into more senior management, senior leadership, and other people end up doing the frontline service delivery. And you may find that you don't like the administrative side of things. You would rather stay with the frontline service delivery. And so at this stage of your ministry growth, you're gaining valuable frontline operational management experience. You're learning what you're good at. You're learning where, if the organization is to grow, you need extra professional or technical skills. And you're also having a deeper sense of self-awareness as to what you can realistically put into this kind of ministry. At this stage, we're not incorporating as a non-profit, you see, not applicable there for that dimension of ministry. But when you engage in active personal ministry, you need to be thinking about what are the pros and the cons of moving towards non-profit registration within your state. And there are some pros and cons to that. You're not really thinking about 501c3 status actively, but it should always be in the back of your mind, because 501c3 status is an important part of helping your ministry go to scale on a national level. And so in terms of going to scale and ministry growth, when you're engaging in a personal ministry and it's not under the umbrella of a local church ministry department, then your growth is limited by your own personal limitations and capacity. If you can only provide 4 hours every Sunday for this ministry, then your ministry is going to stay at that kind of level. And maybe you have independent wealth, or maybe you're retired, in which case you can put more time and effort in and the ministry will grow faster. But going to scale is really limited by who you are as an individual and your capacity to give and to sacrifice to make this ministry grow. And in terms of livelihood, as with church ministry projects and evangelism, at this stage of ministry growth, you maintain your regular livelihood, income and expenditure patterns. So the ministry is not replacing your regular income, your regular livelihood, maybe your wage, maybe your retirement income, I don't know, but it's your regular livelihood is remaining in place, and the active personal ministry stage of growth is not actually providing you with any direct income. And then we come to the third stage out of 4, which is where, after much prayer, you say, maybe it's time for us to incorporate as a non-profit within our local state. And so in terms of God's calling and leading, this is where you prayerfully recognize how God has led you to this point. And it is important to be able to reflect on how God has blessed you, how he shaped your ministry, how you thought maybe your ministry started with an idea that it would be nice to do something about this problem, and how over the space of maybe 2 or 3 years, God really refined through personal ministry, a ministry option and service delivery mechanism that really made an impact within your focus population. And so in terms of shifting to non-profit status, you really need to ask, is God opening doors of opportunity that require greater organizational capacity to meet the growing needs? There comes a time when one individual cannot bear all the burdens. There comes a time when you need to maybe purchase various kinds of liability insurance. There comes a time where people are saying, we'd like to donate, but who do we donate it to? And they don't want to donate it to you personally, and you don't want that either, because that just increases your taxable income. People want to give to nonprofits rather than to individuals. When it comes to personal giftedness and interest, at this stage, you're prayerfully considering what are the additional skills and knowledge that you need to be aligned with you in order to thrive as a nonprofit. So before we give birth to a nonprofit, what set of skills and knowledge do we actually need to make this work? You may want to conduct a SWOT analysis with your potential board members here, SWOT is a management acronym. Strengths and weaknesses, S&W, they represent the internal strengths and weaknesses of your current active personal ministry. And opportunities and threats, those are external opportunities for growth and external threats, things that might hurt your ministry or that may shut you down. And so an opportunity, for instance, if you feel a burden to minister to a large refugee population in your local area, an opportunity would be the arrival of 50,000 refugees from Southeast area within your zip code. That's a massive opportunity for ministry, but there may be a corresponding threat. Corresponding threat may be that, okay, maybe these people are of a hostile religious faith and they don't want anything to do with Christians. And so you have to balance that kind of analysis with potential board members to see what is the best way to go forward. And then you need to ask, will you maintain your current livelihood? If you go to a non-profit status, you're starting to have the need for semi-professional leadership and administration. And so are you going to maintain your current livelihood? Or when you go to nonprofit, are you going to look to transition to full-time nonprofit leadership? And can you afford to do that? Are you at a stage of life where you can step aside from your regular job, your regular wage, your regular benefits if you have them, and are you willing to step out in faith and to lead full-time a local nonprofit as an employee of that nonprofit? And so in terms of reproducibility of ministry, when you're looking to incorporate a nonprofit, you really have to carefully and prayerfully think through what's the ministry mission, what are its strategies, what are the options for ministry delivery, what are the deliverables, and what are the outputs. And if you cannot articulate this, it's probably worth waiting before you incorporate as a nonprofit, because when you do incorporate as a nonprofit, then you have to have these things thought through in order to invite people to support the nonprofit in a meaningful way as donors. And then you have to ask, is this ministry state specific, or does it have nationwide potential? So if you're looking to minister to, let's say, the Somali community in northern Minneapolis, this is a very state-specific kind of evangelistic focus group, but you may recognize that maybe there are 3 or 4 other cities in America with large Somali populations, and so it may not have nationwide potential growth, but this ministry may grow to maybe 2 or 3 other locations, other large urban areas elsewhere outside of our state. And if you are going to incorporate as a nonprofit, start thinking about what are the resources needed for ministry growth, not just financial, but also human resources and office infrastructure. And do you have physically an office? Can you store legal paperwork? And there is a federal act that actually defines how long you have to keep certain kinds of paperwork. For instance, people's application forms, monthly financial reports, invoices and receipts. When you have to file, you have to keep people's I-9s and W-4s. And there are legal requirements covering all of these areas. And so do you have the resources needed to manage that and remain legally compliant? When it comes to financial expectations, if you're going to incorporate nonprofit, you need to get a board approved annual budget. And that would include your startup capital, and your startup requirements for cash, and as well as your annual operating budget. Where is your income going to come from, and how is that money going to be spent? What are your expense priorities, and are you covering all the costs? Because even though this is a non-profit, what non-profit in practice means is not for loss, because no non-profit can run indefinitely while making a loss every year. The difference between a private profit-making corporation and a non-profit organization is where the surplus every year goes. So in a private corporation like Ford Motor Corporation, if there is profit in that business, then the board pays that back as dividends to the shareholders. But in a non-profit organization, there are no dividends to any shareholders. Rather, the surplus every year is reinvested in the ministry. And so when you're looking at your ministry financial expectations, it may be a non-profit, but you're running this as a sustainable private enterprise in order that the ministry can deliver on a sustainable basis for many years to come. And so you need to start thinking about your development strategy. Who are your donors going to be? Where are you going to find those donors? Do you know people who can provide sustaining donations for your new ministry? And what are your donor database options? And I think it's important that once you start looking at an official nonprofit, it's worth starting to think about donor databases. Some people call it CRM software, customer relation management software. But you do need a donor database if you're going to grow beyond anything more than 10 or 20 people that you can keep track of in a spreadsheet. And so you need to think about the financial expectations, and do you have the capacity to manage finances, or is finance something where you tend to get into trouble and you need to find somebody else to manage that for you? And when it comes to personal time commitment, when you're running, when you incorporate as a nonprofit, if you're going to run it from your home, the problem is you think at first, yes, I don't need to go to an office, I'm going to work from home, but very soon working from home becomes living at work. And it's very, very hard to maintain boundaries, physical and time boundaries, when you're running a nonprofit from your home office. I mean, I run As Needle to the Pole from my kitchen desk, and the family will be eating a meal around me, and I'm working on emails in front of them. And these are very unhealthy time and space boundaries, and I recognize that. But when you're starting a nonprofit, the demand for your time is significant, and you're making use of every waking moment. So when it comes to personal time commitment and you're going to establish a nonprofit, certainly during the startup phase, the startup months, before you have a regular sources of income, you're probably going to work from a home office, and you want to be very precise and intentional about your physical boundaries and your time boundaries. And this means you need agreement with your family and maybe with your spouse on their level of involvement, and you need to ring fence time with them. When it comes to legal liability for nonprofits, when you're thinking of starting up a nonprofit, you need to get quotes for ministry general liability insurance, D&O, that's directors and officers liability, vehicle and property insurance as needed. And so if you have a nonprofit, you're going to have a board. Every nonprofit has a board. Normally you have at least 3 people on the board. The requirements vary from state to state. I think some states allow 1 director, but generally the majority of states require at least 3 officers. And those officers will probably say, we're happy to serve on your board, but we want the nonprofit to pay for liability insurance so that if anybody sues, then we do have liability cover for ourselves. So that's called D&O insurance. When it comes to legal liability, you also want to clarify the legal requirements for how long paperwork is to be saved. And that is specified under federal law and also under state law. And so this covers all the possible parts of paperwork that you use. So incorporation paperwork, human resource paperwork, payroll, Form 990s, W-2s, I-9s, W-4s, and board minutes, ADCOM minutes if you do grow to have an ADCOM. There are legal requirements for how long you keep this paperwork. And once you start to run a nonprofit, you need to be aware of these things. And if you're not aware of these things yourself, I would suggest you don't need to go to the effort of reinventing the wheel. Ask somebody who's already doing this and ask them if they'll share how they do it so that you can really gain economies of scale from a sister ministry. You want to maintain hard and soft copies of all your paperwork in secure facilities at home and in a third location. You want, your home could burn to the ground, your home could be have a home invasion, it could be a burglary. You want to make sure that you have hard and soft copies in at least 2 locations for future reference. And once you start having a nonprofit, if you're using your personal vehicle for nonprofit purposes and also for personal purposes, you need to start keeping a mileage log, because that's going to impact your year-end financial, your tax statements and your tax returns for you as an individual. And when it comes to technical and professional skills, it's really worthwhile as you're starting up a nonprofit to develop an organizational chart. The organizational chart is like the skeleton of the organization. And once you develop an organizational chart, you say, well, I would fill this role, but who's going to fill this role and who's going to fulfill this role? And once you identified an organizational chart, then you want to work with your board to develop some job descriptions for the key roles that still need to be filled. And then you're going to prayerfully seek for people who can take on those defined roles. And regardless of your ministry activity, regardless of whether you're doing counseling or books for school children or food program for those who are impoverished, for street people on the streets, you might say for the unhoused community, regardless of what ministry activity you're doing, there are certain professional skills that you absolutely need when you're running a nonprofit these days. And based on my experience, those priority skills are website management, social media, bookkeeping, and accounting. And it really doesn't matter whether you're doing a prison ministry or a preaching ministry or running a forest school or setting up a program to minister to people with certain medical condition in your community. Once you've established a nonprofit, there's a certain organizational infrastructure that must be in place for that nonprofit to sustain itself, for it to avoid devolving into just chaos. And so you're looking for people with website management, social media, bookkeeping, and accounting skills. And I would encourage you to consider becoming a Loud Cry International member, because that allows you to receive donations through LCI, and the donors would receive tax-deductible donations from LCI, and you would receive the income, and the donors would receive their tax-deductible donations. This is even before you have 501c3 status yourself, and you may decide not to seek 501c3 status, but to remain as a local nonprofit, but benefiting from the LCI 501c3 status as a better option for you. And so those are some of the professional and technical skills. The next thing you want to consider in terms of nonprofit management experience, we've grown now from leading a local church department through running a private ministry because you have a burden for some group in society. Now you're into nonprofit management. And this is a highly skilled area which requires a broad wealth of knowledge on human resources, finance, legal, state incorporation, and a whole variety of things. So when you're looking for board members, there are two qualifications for board members, assuming they're born-again Seventh-day Adventists, of course, is that they must bring either wealth or wisdom. And board members need to bring one of those two things. You may have volunteers, but volunteers who like the frontline delivery involvement, they may not necessarily bring much wealth or wisdom to your organization. And so as your nonprofit is incorporated, you're looking for people who can bring wealth or wisdom. So for instance, you may want to find a local Adventist who shares this burden with you, who maybe is a CPA. That person will be a great addition to your board. Maybe if you're running dental programs overseas, you would want at least one or two individuals with dental experience on your board. They know about they know about how this service is delivered. And when it comes to wealth, it'd be nice if you found somebody with financial wealth, but you may also look for people with wealth in terms of connections with the church, or maybe legal knowledge, or maybe a wealth of practical experience in this area of ministry. And so if you can't find those people, it's really helpful as you incorporate a nonprofit to find a mentor. Maybe somebody who has gone before you through an incorporation process. Maybe somebody who can share with you some practical advice, maybe even paperwork. This is how we did it. This is how you could adapt this and use it in your scenario and for your ministry. But finding a mentor is a great way to jumpstart the incorporation process and make sure you're avoiding the pitfalls that comes through running a nonprofit. I would encourage you, if you join LCI, to attend the conventions, watch the podcasts, and the conventions to intentionally network and meet as many people as you can and understand who's doing what and who can I provide encouragement and advice to, and who can I turn to within this growing network when I need particular advice on something, is there somebody I know who can have a half-hour conversation with me? When it comes to the incorporation itself, we're getting into some nitty-gritty here. I understand that. You want to identify your board members, and in different states, there's a different process to incorporate a nonprofit. Normally, you can just do a Google search, how to incorporate a nonprofit in your state, New Hampshire or Florida or Michigan. And normally the process is quite straightforward, and most times it can be done online through an online filing process, and it may cost you $10, $20, $100 to file online your incorporation paperwork. And the incorporation paperwork tends to be relatively short, maybe 3 to 5 pages, and it's relatively easy to fill it out. But before you file the incorporation paperwork, you need to gather what will be your board and have them vote. I put it there. They need to vote to establish a new nonprofit in your state with a mission statement. And they need to approve your incorporation application, including the identities of the directors and the officers. Your board needs to approve the bylaws of your organization, and also a conflict of interest, and also a dissolution policy. A dissolution is important. If you decide to shut your nonprofit, where do the assets get distributed? And it needs to go to a corresponding nonprofit. So you may say that if our nonprofit closes down, we want the assets to go to the local Adventist conference for this state. Or you may say, I want to go to another LCI member who has a similar ministry within my state as well. Your board will want to vote to open a PO box. They'll vote to establish a capitalization level. And the capitalization level is important from an accounting perspective. And it essentially says that in any item, if you set your capitalization level at, say, $10,000, it says that if you purchase an item costing $10,000 or more, then it's a capital asset, and it appears on your balance sheet as a fixed asset. And then you have depreciation charged every year for 3 or 5 years in your operating budget. But if it's under $10,000, if it's $10,000 and you spend $6,000 on something, then that doesn't appear in your balance sheet as a fixed asset, but that's just an expensed item in your income and expenditure and budget for the year. And so this affects what you charge depreciation on. It's an accounting issue, but you do need to vote a capitalization level. And most nonprofits have their capitalization set between $3,000 and $10,000. You also need to vote to apply for an EIN. That's a federal employer identification number. Once you have an EIN, and it takes you 10 minutes online to do this, it costs about $600. And you have to have your state registration incorporation number to get your EIN. Once you have your EIN, only then can you open a checking and saving account together with the signatories. And the board needs to vote to open a checking account with such and such a bank, and the board needs to define who the signatories are. And when you go to open the account, you need to show your incorporation paperwork, your bylaws, and the votes to open the account, or you won't be able to open the account. You also want the board to vote to purchase a web domain or a series of web domains for your nonprofit. And also you need to start preparing your solicitation registration filings for your state and for other states. Now, what is that? So if you're in Michigan and your ministry and your nonprofit is incorporated in Michigan and you're mostly going to fundraise in Michigan, you need to file a solicitation filing with the state of Michigan to let them know that you are going to be fundraising within Michigan. And there are 50 states in the US, and every state has a different threshold for when you need to file for a solicitation filing. So if you have if you're based in Michigan and people hear about your ministry in Virginia and send you a donation in the mail, you don't need a solicitation filing for the state of Virginia. If, however, you pay for somebody, even as a volunteer, you cover their expenses to go and speak in churches for you in another state, you may then pass a threshold, and you're required to file a solicitation filing within that state. Now, when I was in AFM, we filed for over 20 states because of the AFM magazine that went to many states. And it took us about 3 months a year for one person just to fill out those 20 plus solicitation filings. This is a serious amount of work. And those solicitation filings are very detailed technical documents. But before you engage in the time and effort to do that, you should at least file in your own state for a solicitation filing. And if you go to your Secretary of State's department online, they will normally have the forms there for you to fill out. And if before you start filing in other states, closely examine what their requirements are, because sometimes they say if you're a religious organization, you don't need to do this. Another states say if you have a part-time fundraiser in our state paid by your organization, only then would you need to file a solicitation filing. So every state is different, and some states charge you $10 and some states charge you $500 for a solicitation filing. So what I'm giving you here, these are some of the basic steps you need to take as you incorporate your nonprofit. When it comes to 501c3, your state nonprofit, if you're thinking that one day you're going to file for 501c3 status, then when you incorporate in your state, then there are certain language you must include in your state level incorporation documents that will later be required by the IRS in your 501c3 application. And so I've given you there a standard paragraph on the screen which says the corporation is organized exclusively for charitable, religious, educational, and scientific purposes, including for such purposes the making of distributions to organizations that qualify as exempt organizations under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code or the corresponding section of any future federal tax code, end quote. So if you intend in the future to file 501c3 with the IRS, you need to include this language in your state level filing, incorporation documents. Otherwise, the IRS is not going to approve your 501c3 application. Now, it is possible in most states, I think probably all of them, if you don't get your state incorporation paperwork correct the first time, you can always refile an amended incorporation certificate or paperwork that includes the required paperwork for the IRS. So if you don't get it right first time with your state incorporation paperwork, it's not the end of the world. You can file an amendment that includes the required paperwork. But if you are going to grow to 501c3 status, please understand that you need to have a minimum of 3 board directors, and they cannot be related by marriage or birth. Now, at a state level, that may or may not be possible depending on your state. But it's worth thinking this through, that when you incorporate as a state level nonprofit for your ministry, if you want to go for 501c3 status in the future, then those directors cannot be related by marriage or by birth. And when it comes to going to scale, when you incorporate a nonprofit, you want to conduct a strategic planning exercise with the board and your key donors. It's not just in your head. This is now a legal organization, and you want as much buy-in as possible. And there is a saying in Africa, they say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And it's better to go 80% with a team around you than to strive for 100% on your own and come up short and then maybe only achieve 50% of what you want to do. So conducting a strategic planning exercise near the birthing process of your organization, it really helps, because I'll put on the screen, you plan the work and then you work the plan. And sometimes you have a visionary leader, maybe you have a clear vision for your ministry, but when you incorporate many people, they don't have that passionate mission, but they do understand they need nonprofit status. And so having a bunch of like-minded people, your board members and key donors, plan the work, your job is then to work the plan. And so that means you don't have to come up with all the ideas. If you are a great administrator, but you're not creative, if you're not a blue sky thinker, that's okay. If you have 1 or 2 of them on your board, they help to plan the work. And then if you are focusing on execution and on achievement and focusing on outputs, on deliverables, you can then focus on working the plan. And so this is where you're looking at teamwork with your board. And when it comes to your local livelihood, once you've, let's go through the 4 stages again. When you were in your local church, you weren't giving up your livelihood to take an active part in local church ministry. When you then grew and you moved into a personal ministry that you set up, most people are still maintaining their regular livelihood and doing this as a part-time labor of love or hobby or ministry in their spare time. But now you're looking at incorporation as non-profit. This now requires you to ask a very hard question. Are you going to keep your current livelihood, or are you going to switch to part-time or full-time non-profit leadership? And that's a decision that you have to make. It's very personal. It affects your healthcare. It affects any other benefits that are important to you. It affects your salary. If you're coming up to retirement, you may have a relatively high level of income in an established profession. You may be the principal in a public school system, and 3 years out from retirement, you want to incorporate and have a huge cut in your income. That's going to have a big impact on your Social Security when you retire. And so that's a very, very personal decision you have to make as to whether you're going to switch to full-time nonprofit leadership with income, salary from the nonprofit as an employee, or you're going to keep your current livelihood. And so at this stage, you're working with the board to say, is it financially feasible to become a full-time nonprofit employee? And one way to kind of square this circle is to say to the board, we're just going to, I will act as a volunteer for 3 months, and then after 3 months, let's do an honest assessment of how much income is coming in, and can we afford to put me on maybe a stipend? And after 6 months, can we afford to put me on part-time, 20 hours a week? And after 1 year, if the income is there, then we will switch to full-time employment, and only then will I step away from my regular livelihood. So these are the kind of questions you're asking, because running a non-profit and setting up a non-profit is a lot of work. You know, when I was setting up As Needle to the Pole, I was working from 8 a.m. till about 10 a.m. at night, with not much time off to eat or exercise. So I was putting in maybe 13 hours a day. And then I'm traveling all day Friday, preaching all day Sabbath, and traveling all day Sunday. So I'm putting in about 70 to 80 hours a week through most of 2025. And so when you start up a nonprofit, it's like starting a business. You don't have departments. If your website goes down, you've got to fix it. If there's a problem with the vehicle, you've got to fix it. You've got to think about logos and letterheads. And there's a plethora of things you have to think through and take care of. And generally, it's just you and 1 or 2 other people. So it's very, very time intensive. So at this stage of ministry growth, when you start a new ministry, don't be surprised if in the first year you spend an inordinate amount of time on administration, just setting up the architecture so that the delivery can take place going forward. And so once again, you may realize at this stage of your ministry growth that you need a professional, a full-time nonprofit manager, administrator for your ministry, because you want to remain at frontline service delivery. But many people, they gravitate from frontline service delivery into full-time management and end up asking other people to do the service delivery for them because the organization is growing. So then the final stage of nonprofit growth is the 501c3. And so we've gone through working in a local church, and it's grown and it's evolved into an active personal ministry that's outgrown your local church. And then that's grown and grown, and you realized, okay, we need to incorporate as a nonprofit because donors want to give to a nonprofit. We need liability insurance for the kind of ministry that we're doing, and so forth. There are many reasons why you would go down the nonprofit route, but then there will come a time when you have to ask yourself the question, are we going to incorporate as a 501c3 nonprofit? And many nonprofits, when they incorporate, already know that they want 501c3. And as soon as they have filed and received their incorporation from their state, then they immediately start working on their 501c3 paperwork. So you don't have to wait 2 or 3 years as a nonprofit before you file for your 501c3, and the application process can take anywhere from 3 to 9 months, depending on which federal office is processing your application. So let's go through those dimensions of ministry one last time here. In terms of God's calling and leading, by this stage, you need to be sharing regularly with your board, your volunteers, your employees, and your donors how God is leading and blessing. You want to celebrate the successes. You want to talk about answered prayers. You want to celebrate God's providential leading. Why do you want to do this? Because this builds support, it builds buy-in, it encourages people. Ministry is hard. People want to know that God is with us, that God is working through us. And when we see answers to prayer and God working providentially on our behalf, that means the whole ministry gains wind behind its sails and it can push forward. When it comes to personal giftedness and interest, at this stage, when you're moving to 501c3, you need to be honest about your own limitations and capacity to lead. You may have a lifetime of experience in nonprofit management, like I do, so this kind of comes naturally, like water off a duck's back, you might say, as we say, at least we say that in England. But you may have never managed a nonprofit, and the application form and the IRS paperwork is just kind of overwhelming for you. And so you need to be intentional about learning about HR, administration, and the necessary leadership skills. I want to encourage you, if you do go down the nonprofit 501c3 route, there are conferences held in America for Christian nonprofits that are worth visiting. Sometimes the North American division will put on a leadership program for ministry leaders, so those are relatively rare. But there are some excellent national conferences, such as the CRA, where people can go. I think it's the CRA. Where people can go and they have breakout sessions in all possible areas of nonprofit management. And so at this stage, you need to be very intentional about growing, because now you're moving into professional management, not just a local goodwill kind of ministry. And there are IRS regulations affecting how you operate now. So when it comes to your personal giftedness, you still need to remain curious about your ministry sector. It's worth defining the biblical basis for your ministry, and you need to be open to learning new concepts, new ideas, and new management skills. And in terms of reproducibility of ministry, now you really need to define tightly in a strategic plan your mission, your strategies, your deliverables, and your outputs. And you're asking now, as you're a 501c3 and people can donate from all across America, is your ministry just going to stay focused on one state, or are you looking to grow it nationwide? And if it is going to grow nationwide, then what capacity do you need to build into the organization, and what resources, financial or human, do you need to sustain that ministry growth? And so in the first year of a nonprofit, you're really building the architecture. When you build a home, you've got to lay the foundation, you've got to put the walls, the plumbing, the electrics, the drywalling in. And when you're building a nonprofit, much of the first year is spent just putting the architecture in place so that you can support ongoing ministry in a sustainable manner. When it comes to ministry financial expectations, you need to start implementing your friend-raising development strategy. Notice I didn't say fundraising, I'm talking about friend-raising. When people share in your vision, when people have a burden for your mission, they will give naturally. And if you go and speak in a church, you may be looking to raise funds, but in that case, you may get a one-off cash crop. But if you want to have sustaining support from members in that church, that is regular support, you're looking to raise friends rather than raise funds. And those friends, they buy into your mission, they buy into your vision, it's something that's important to them, and therefore they're going to support you. There's an excellent book called The God Ask by Steve Shadrach, and it outlines a very well thought through biblical approach to development and donor ministry. I'd recommend anybody who's moving at least into a state nonprofit, even before you get to 501c3, to read the book The God Ask. And you need to practice your public and private fundraising asks. And some people find this very hard, but if you're leading a nonprofit, you have to bring home the bacon, or at least the tofu. You have to bring home the bacon, and that means you've got to go and raise funds. And fundraising, for some people, it's like pulling teeth, but it really isn't. Fundraising is a blessing, because you meet people and they say to you, I have this $5,000. I've been waiting and waiting and waiting. And when you spoke in church today, the Holy Spirit said to me, this is where I want those funds to go, that you're an answer to my prayers. And so when people give you funds, it's not just because they want to give you money because they like you. It's because they share in the vision, they share in the passion. The Holy Spirit has impressed them to do something. And for them, it's an intensely and personally a spiritual exercise, not just a financial exercise. So you need to practice making a public appeal for funds, and you also need to practice what it means to meet with somebody in their home and walk through with them all the options and narrow down to what they're going to support. And so increasingly, donors want to have significance in their giving. Now, somebody will say, I want to give you $10 a month. And you say, praise the Lord, because every brick in the wall is necessary. But somebody's going to say, I want to put a roof over those 4 walls because that's going to finish off this project. And I want to know that it was my donation that provided the turnkey and made that ministry possible. And so when you meet with donors, you're trying to understand how much they're thinking of giving. What is their motivation for giving? What area of concern or interest do they have when it comes to giving? And therefore, what are they likely to commit to? And some people who will give you $10 a month, and praise Lord for that. Everyone is important. And some people are sitting on $50,000. They're wondering what to do with it. Maybe it was a bequest. Maybe they need to give it away for tax reasons. Maybe they have a business and they need to offset their capital gains in their business by giving to a nonprofit. And so they have $50,000 that they have to give away, or they're going to have taxes to Uncle Sam. And so understanding who your donor is, what their financial concerns are, what is their financial situation is really important for successful donor ministry. And then when it comes to personal time commitment, as I said before, if you're running your nonprofit from home, then working from home simply becomes living at work. And maintaining boundaries becomes really important. Otherwise, you end up working 24/7. In all honesty, I'm running as an eagle to the pole, and I'm putting in 70 to 80 hours every single week, of which maybe 6 hours is sermon writing, and the rest is the administration needed to set everything up. And so, again, you need to agree with your family on how much they're going to be involved. You need to be intentional about ring fencing time with them. When it comes to legal liability for a nonprofit, a 501c3, you need to maintain organizational general liability insurance. If you hold big events, you can buy event liability. If you hold, like, say, a weekend conference somewhere, you can buy event liability for $300 to $1,000 for a big event. Directors and officers insurance, D&O, vehicle, and other insurance as needed. You're going to have to maintain all your organizational records as required by federal and state law. And so you need to find out what that is. And as I said before, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Ask somebody who's running a nonprofit if they would share with you their document retention policies, and then that takes you 98% of the way to what you need to do. And you're also wanting to understand the limitations of liability waivers in different states. And this is a big deal for nonprofits, because oftentimes when we have an event, we ask people to sign a liability waiver before they take part in the event. So you may have an event involving young people, let's say a youth evangelism program, and you ask the parents to sign a liability waiver. But liability waivers sometimes are not worth the paper they're written on. Certainly here in Michigan, the Supreme Court here decided that when somebody signs a liability waiver, it really has no standing in law, because you cannot waive liability that you don't yet understand or know. And so in Michigan here, liability waivers are basically a form of moral pressure on people not to sue if one of their family members gets hurt while engaged in ministry with your nonprofit. And in some states, liability waivers are worth the paper they're written on. So you need to maybe get some legal advice in your state if you're going to start using liability waivers. And then in terms of the technical side of running a nonprofit, in addition to all the stuff I've already covered, these are some areas you want to cover. You need to have a website that is suitable for both mobile and desktop applications. Most people these days are making donations from their phones, not from their desktops. And you need to have a website that looks good primarily on a mobile platform rather than a desktop platform. So you're building for cell phones before you're building for tablets and PCs or laptops. You need to have an online payment functionality embedded in your website. It could be PayPal, it could be Square for credit card processing. Some people don't like using PayPal. But actually, PayPal has a lower credit card processing fee than most of the credit card processors, and it also allows people to donate to you from overseas in a way that credit cards would not be able to support that. And so you may drag and drop the PayPal function into your website, and that would still allow people to pay using credit cards and debit cards as well as PayPal. And so it's a good option to have. And some people just go straight for the credit card processors like Square. They're a very good option. For instance, I'm not recommending them particularly here. You can do your own research. But when you design your website, you're going to need to have an embedded online payment function. You also want to have direct giving options such as Zelle or Venmo, a donate page on your website explaining to people how to give using these methods. Zelle is a great way to receive money. The problem with it is that sometimes it's impossible to identify who the donor is. It may say that John R has given you $200 on Zelle, but you have no idea who John R is. And therefore, it's impossible to send a tax-deductible receipt to John R unless he personally identifies himself to you. So Zelle and Venmo are very helpful, particularly for year-end giving, because it's convenient for people to give, but oftentimes you lose the ability to send a tax-deductible receipt. You also want to put out bank wire information for donors. If you put that on your website, just some words of caution. If you put bank wire information, that's your checking account, it's worth having an account for wires separate to your main checking account. Because if you don't have the bank wire information, then people won't send you bank wires. And the largest donations, like 50,000 above, normally come through bank wires, okay? So you want that functionality. But if you have a bank wire information on your website, so when people go to their bank, they can set up the wire, you may find that people may charge their Capital One credit cards or their phones to your bank account if you don't have fraud protection in place. So if you're going to have a bank account with bank wire information on it on your website, just use that bank account for wires and set it up so when a wire lands in your bank wire receiving account, it automatically then bounces across into your checking account, which is not, that information is not publicly available. And there are many fraud prevention tips in place. You can get wire block, positive pay, things like this, so that nobody can use your public bank account information to deduct money from your account. So you need to work with that with your bank, particularly. You want a PO box for checks that is checked daily. You want not just a website with online payment. You also want to have an online donor database. And for a small nonprofit, and this is called CRM software, there's a variety of packages out there. Little Green Light and Boomerang are very well-known options. They're relatively cheap. It may cost you $30 or $40 a month to run one of these online databases, and they can go up to 5,000 or 10,000 donors within them. And so for a new 501c3, these databases are very, very helpful. And what's most helpful about them is they allow you to do automated tax-deductible receipts once you have people's email addresses. And then you also want online QuickBooks for financial reporting. Now, QuickBooks used to have downloadable options for your desktop, but they've stopped that. And they're forcing everybody to an online version. And the two are slightly different. But as I said before, when you're running a nonprofit, you need someone with accounting experience. And if you don't have the accounting experience, don't do it yourself, because the chances are you're not going to meet generally accepted accounting principle, or GAAP as it's called. So if you can find somebody, maybe a retired church treasurer, maybe somebody who's doing an MBA in a local college, an Adventist who you trust, and they become your bookkeeper or your treasurer, they will do the online QuickBooks for you. You also want to have a defined social media strategy that defines what is to be released when, and you also want a speaking schedule on your website for ministry outreach. And so coming to the end of this presentation here, as we talk about the 4 stages of growth, nonprofit management experience, you want board members who have ministry-specific credibility, and you also want them with wealth and wisdom. And you may want to consider establishing an advisory board in addition to your regular executive board. An advisory board may meet 6 months. It may be key donors. It may be people with knowledge of your ministry area, and they're not involved in the detailed decisions that you're making, but they're a good sounding board. And it's good. There is wise to have many counselors. So an advisory board may be helpful for a 501c3, and you also want to have one or two trusted mentors. Even in the Adventist world, it's hard to know who you can trust. It's hard to know who you can have a heart-to-heart with. And sometimes, as the leader of a nonprofit and a 501c3, you need to be able to have someone you can call and just sound off to and just express some of the frustrations. Maybe the frustrations of working with local conference leadership, maybe the frustrations you have working with another Adventist nonprofit, and you want to just bounce ideas. How can we resolve this? How can we seek reconciliation? What is the best way forward for us? So at this stage, you really want to have one or two trusted mentors that you can call for counsel when needed. When you're at this stage of your nonprofit growth, in terms of incorporation, you're maintaining your state solicitation filing registration every single year. You're going to meet your state where you're incorporated the annual reporting requirements. And for the 501c3 status for the IRS, to get 501c3 status, you file Form 1023. And if you expect that the annual income will be less than $50,000 a year for the first 3 years, then you do a Form 1023 easy. But if you go above $50,000 a year, then you have to file the full Form 1023. So my recommendation is just do the full Form 1023. And this takes a normally intelligent person about 40 hours to put a Form 1023 application together. It is detailed. It has business plans. It has budgets, income and expenditure. These are all projections. They're not going to hold you to it, but it shows you've thought through how your business is nonprofit's going to run. It has your bylaws. It has your dissolution clause. It has your conflict of interest policy. These things are all required, and the 1023 walks you through that process. And again, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Certain aspects of this is kind of boilerplate. And you may want to ask another nonprofit who already has 501c3 status. Can you share with us what paperwork you used, what paragraphs you were using of legalese? And if our board is happy with it, then we can use it as well. And so coming down to our last slide here, for when it comes to going to scale, once you have 501c3 status, you need to conduct an annual external audit when your income exceeds a defined level. I think it's about $500,000 right now. And when your annual gross income exceeds $50,000, you have to file a Form 990. And the Form 990 it's basically a financial report that is a cross between a balance sheet and income expenditure statement. And it's better to have your external auditors do this. If you do an external audit, include this in their contract that when they've done the audit, then they will produce the Form 990. Don't try and do it yourself because it's easy to make mistakes. You want to comply with state solicitation requirements nationwide. And once again, the more your ministry grows, the more you are going to be removed from frontline ministry yourself, so you can focus on strategic level and ministry growth needs. And so this is a really important factor to consider. If you want to remain personally involved in frontline ministry, then you may want to not grow your ministry to nonprofit status or 501c3 status. You may want to keep it small because you find joy and God's calling for you is in the direct service delivery. But if you want your ministry to grow and grow and grow, then you're going to move into more professional nonprofit management, and other people are going to be doing the service delivery for you. And this is a question that everybody must wrestle with and answer for themselves. So when it comes to livelihood, by the time you've got a nonprofit and 501c3 status, then you either keep your previous livelihood and you have to hire professional administrators for the nonprofit, and maybe you keep a seat on the board, or maybe you transition to become the full-time permanent president and CEO of the nonprofit as an employee of the nonprofit. Those are really your two options. And for many people, if you choose to stay in service delivery and just retain a seat on the board, you may find that your nonprofit is taken over by the board and goes in directions you don't want. And so you want to make sure that your legacy is maintained through your choice of what you do about livelihood here. And when it comes to salary scales, The IRS is concerned that they must be set according to industry standards, and you must be able to defend the salary levels that you provide for your chief executives and your finance director if you have one. And so you need to, so you can either benchmark with somebody else. You may say, for instance, that your chief exec will earn no more than 95% of your local conference's 100% wage factor. That would be a formula in place that is defensible to the IRS, and it says that you're going to earn 5% less than an ordained pastor in your local conference, and then you let the conference set the wage scale, and then you come in at 95% of that. So you may use a proxy indicator for your wage scale, but that at least shows the IRS that you have thought about avoiding personal annulment or excess private benefit. And so personal annulment is where you personally benefit in an unwanted way from being in a leadership position in a nonprofit. An example of that would be, and this is a classic example, if you go to a conference, rather than flying economy and going to a Motel 6, you hire a private jet and you stay in the penthouse suite of the Hilton. When the auditors take a look at that, that's personal annulment. And that was personally benefiting over and above what is considered reasonable from your leadership position in the organization. And so those then are the 4 stages of ministry growth. You start off with a ministry in a church, then it evolves into a personal ministry. And there are pros and cons to that. And then you may decide to incorporate as a nonprofit in your state. And then the final stage of growth is 501c3, which is really moving into professional management. And with a 501c3, you have the potential to have a nationwide and even a global reach, depending on the kind of ministry that you're using, that you are running there. And so I just wanted to share this with you because I've spent 30 years doing this kind of stuff, and there are pitfalls to avoid. And I haven't answered all the questions here, but what I hope I've done is given some pointers as to things to be thinking about at each stage of this journey. And as a member of LCI, to recognize that there are people who may have gone there before you, they've been there, they've got the t-shirt, and you can call somebody else and say, hey, I just want to chew the cud with you here. I want to ask, how did you do this? Because in LCI, we want to be a viable ministry incubator. We want ministries to be able to grow and thrive, and to help people when they are maybe weak in some area, so that where they are strong, God can really shine through them in their chosen ministry. So with that, Brother Jonathan, that's my presentation, and I'd like to hand back to you and to our Q&A session.
Thank you so much for that. All right, John, can you hear us?
Yeah, I want to thank you. That was a great presentation. I think there's a lot of good information in there, and we have some questions. I don't know,
Yes.
but I want to start with just a couple observations. I think that it's easy to get mired down in the details of this kind of thing. And for those of you that were listening, we're going to put this up on webpage so you can go back and look at it. But one of the things I would say is that I've advised a lot of these different nonprofits, and the thing to do is to just take it off one piece at a time and go through just one step at a time. And it's not as hard or as overwhelming as maybe it sounded from that presentation. So anyway, James, I think that you have some questions that came in.
Yes, we have some questions. This is coming from Linnell Darrow. Okay, so the question is, how do you find someone to help you with accounting and financial bookkeeping as a newish nonprofit?
This is one of the hardest things to answer. You know, in Berrien Springs here, Pastor Kelly is starting AMI, and Pastor Dennis Page is starting Drops of Grace, a prison ministry, and I'm starting AN2P, and Pastor Gerhard Erbs is starting an apologetics ministry, and every one of us was looking for accounting skills. And in a small community like this, you're asking, like, do we know anybody who's an accountant, and so forth? I think that this really comes down to networking, and going to conferences, going to ASI conventions, going to going to GYCs, maybe going to your local Adventist college and asking if in the business, in the accounting department, they have students who actually are looking for professional experience, who maybe who can do, they've qualified, so they can do your basic accounting for you. They're not a CPA yet, but they can certainly do your bookkeeping and keep your accounts where they should be. So I don't know if LCI will have like a job posting or a place on its website where people can say, hey, we need these skills or not. But accounting is an area that takes a lot of time, and between you and your accountant, you have to have a good understanding and a good working relationship. But you have to be very intentional about finding that accountant, and that involves networking, being creative, going to Adventist colleges, looking for retired professors, looking for retired conference treasurers, looking for retired church treasurers. You know, a local church with 30 members, the treasury work is relatively easy. But if you have a church like Loma Linda, whoever was in treasury at Loma Linda is basically functioning almost at a CPA level. And when they retire, they're a wealth of experience that they can bring to your ministry. So this really comes down to networking and prayer.
So if I could comment on that, I think that you shouldn't be afraid of hiring an accountant, just a straight up professional. I think that there's a lot of attempts to try to find a Seventh-day Adventist who will volunteer their accounting time, but I think that may not be a reasonable way. And I think that, it can be, and that's a great thing if you can do that. But there's no shame in going out and hiring an accountant. I also think that there's probably three concepts that you need to have in mind when you're looking for accounting. One is there's something called bookkeeping. With bookkeeping, you can learn how to do that yourself. And with a smaller ministry, you may be stuck doing that because bookkeeping is very tedious and time consuming. And so until you can afford to outsource that, to hire someone as a bookkeeper, but you don't have to be trained anything in particular. You don't need a degree or anything like that. You just need to learn how to do it. And then the second thing is an accountant who will do your accounting. And this is someone that you may find yourself that you actually need to just go hire. And then the third thing is the person who's going to be able to do your taxes. And the that may be the same person as the accountant, but it may not be. It could be that you work through a bookkeeper and that you have them working with a local accountant, and you still hand it off to someone for the actual filing of the 990s and things like that. I saw a question that came in, and the question was whether your accountant should be a board member or not. Well, it's certainly great if you have someone who's a Seventh-day Adventist volunteering to put them on the board with that kind of expertise, but it's not at all required. You'll have someone that's your treasurer who will be on your board, but that person is not necessarily any of those things that we just described. There's someone that's responsible and actually knows where you are financially.
Could I add to that, Jonathan?
Sure.
I think what you say is absolutely right. The bookkeeper is doing your daily debits and credits, and that's very different to somebody who is operating as a treasurer. A treasurer is ensuring that your financial statements are accurate and is giving wise financial advice on the financial decisions, whereas a bookkeeper is more of an accounting technician, and they're going to make sure that the debits and credits are entered correctly in the chart of accounts, and most importantly, when the trial balance balances, then the treasurer or the CPA or the accountant can do your balance sheet, income, expenditure, and other forms. And so I would agree with you that the bookkeeper may be somebody you pay locally by the hour to do your accounts for you. I actually, in my ministry in AM2P, my treasurer lives in America and my bookkeeper lives in Africa. And with the internet, everything is done online. And so don't confine yourself just to America. We are a global ministry, or we are global. The world is small because of the internet. And you may look for a bookkeeper in Kenya, if that's where you have operations, someone you trust, and their job is to process the transactions, and that'll be lower cost for you. And then you have somebody on your board who is CPA retired, for instance, and they are the ones who maybe finalize your monthly financial statements. But I would not put the bookkeeper on the board. but you will need a secretary treasurer for your organization, and that person should have some decent accounting experience, if not be a CPA.
Yeah, I just think it's a big ask, though, to have a CPA on your board or someone like that. Anyway.
All right. Thank you so much. Somebody said, can a nonprofit be a member of LCI? So what are the benefits compared to those of an individual member?
Yeah, so what we've planned for LCI right now is for just individuals to be members, and that we don't have an organizational tier. We may do that depending upon what the demand is for that, but our feeling is that we want to have as many individuals as we possibly can, and we will support organizations. And of course, as we look at organizations, we'll look to see if the individuals at the organization are members or not. And so my advice is that if you have an organization and you want to be involved with LCI, join yourself personally and join as many as the people that work with your organization into LCI. And that way we'll grow LCI on a more grassroots individual level. And but we are thinking about other things. But for now, anyway, we're looking towards just individual members.
Okay. Thank you for that. All right. We do have another question in the chat here. It says that I recently started an online blog, as I like to write. It's very small. All right. I'm only just starting, so nowhere near beginning to grow to a nonprofit yet. My question is, most ministries I know are YouTube based, where their videos are reacted to by other ministries, driving traffic to other channels. How can I get help driven traffic to my website to help grow my ministry? Oh.
Well, I would answer that too and say, stay tuned. We're going to have a lot of these training sessions, and I think that we'll have some sessions that actually talk about this subject.
Yeah.
This is more of a marketing subject, and it's not really what we're talking about right here today, but this is really important. And we all need to become aware of this, and we're in a changing landscape. I think the way things work in the past is changing because AI people now are using ChatGPT and stuff as searches. So I'm looking forward to hearing about how to do this.
Yeah, and something I would add to that is we're all assuming that YouTube is a good place to be, and it really is the best platform for wide distribution and ease of use. But as we saw recently with Scott Ritzmer and Belt of Truth Ministries and a number of other ministries, and I think Advent Media Connect highlighted this very efficiently. Scott Ritzmer had his channel taken down, and then it came back a couple of days later. And so there is Audioverse out there, but if you're somebody like myself, you've been banned from Audioverse, and Audioverse only wants people who sing the corporate tune these days. And so I'm actually developing myself with some developers. I'm developing a website. There'll be a cross between YouTube and Audioverse for Adventists that can host its own videos and not be dependent on YouTube. And that would also be a place where we'd open it up to people who are running their own podcasts, people who want to run their own sermons, so that we have our own web infrastructure and we cannot be shut down by YouTube or anybody else. So that will probably be ready by fall this year. The development is about to start. And this is recognizing that cancel culture is real. And I'd like it to be a one-stop shop, a place a bit like a warehouse where people can type in your name or the name of your ministry, and a selection of all your online materials comes up. And so this is what I run As Needle to the Pole, but I'm doing this for my own needs because I don't want to get shut down by YouTube, but I want to make it available to all the other Adventist ministries as well.
Oh, that's beautiful. Very good. Very good. All right. Do we have any more questions? Okay. Thank you, guys.
If you don't have a question, I want to raise one.
Yeah.
And my question is, I was sitting and listening to your presentation, Conrad. You talk about the 4 stages of development. And one of the things that I do when I'm dealing with my clients is I ask them why they want to be at each particular different stage. And I think that this is a useful conversation to have. And And my conversation and the question that I have is, your stage 3 is a incorporated but not 501c3 stage, and I'm just curious to know, with your view as to why you would put that as a full stage. I appreciate what you were saying, but I'm not quite sure. Most of my clients, I actually take them from stage 2 to stage 4.
Yeah, that's a fair question. So, it depends on a variety of factors. One is, some people want a nonprofit and they're expecting annual income to be $20,000, something like that. And most of their donors are $100 a year or less. And since the 2017 tax bill came out under President Trump, the standard deductions doubled in 2017. And the standard deductions now are at such level that most Adventists don't reach the level of the standard deduction. So we always assume that you need 501c3 status, but I've been doing this for many, many years. You really only need 501c3 status for people who are planning their wealth and planning their giving very carefully to maximize or to minimize their tax liability to Uncle Sam. And the vast majority of Adventist donors are not in that place. So if you're going to, it seems to me, if you get 501c3 status, you need to be assuming you're going to get individual donations of, let's say, 10 to 20,000 and above. Because then you're going to go over the 50,000 limit, and you're going to have an external audit. If you are just going to get 20,000 gross income a year, let's say, and almost all your donations are under $1,000, those donors, actually, most of them do not need a tax deductible receipt. And they may ask for it, and there may be a matter of donor education, say, well, we don't have it because most people don't need it. So if you're a bigger nonprofit, you attract bigger donations, and bigger donations require tax exempt status. If you're a smaller nonprofit and you just want to keep it small and niche, for instance, and your annual income is, let's say, 30 or 40,000, and your donor base is very diverse, it's not dependent on one individual or two individuals, then it's hard to see the benefit of getting 501c3 status. So it really depends on how you see the ministry growing, your knowledge of your donor base, and what the anticipated case mix of your donations is going to be.
So I just make a couple comments on that. One thing I would say is that the state, with their nonprofits, actually expect you to behave like a 501c3. So a lot of the ethical different requirements and things like that actually apply to you, even though you don't have the 501c3 status. And I think that the people listening to that really should be aware of that. One other comment I would make is that if you want the 501c3 status, you're going to stay under $50,000 a year. The tax requirements aren't really that great. The tax form that you fill out is small enough and simple enough, you wouldn't even necessarily have to hire someone else to do it. It's a pretty simple process. There's another thing that I would like to encourage anyone who's going to be at the stage where they're going to start to look at taking donations, and that is go ahead and start thinking about the 501c3 process. And Conrad talked about the fact that there's short form and long form, depending upon how much money you think you're going to come in, and he was saying that you might want to just do the long form. Well, the thing that I want to say about that is that that's kind of a recent development in the 501c3 world. It used to be everybody had to do the long form. And one of the benefits of doing the long form, if you actually read it and work through it, it was an educational tool. And what I would encourage all of you to do if you're going to be taking donations is look at the 501c3 long form. It gives you a primer as to what you're getting into as far as the nonprofit world is. And it's a really good educational process. One of the things that I don't like is that I'll have clients that come to me eventually, sometimes. I don't do a lot of these, but I have done a few of them, where they want me to do the 501c3 application for them. And the problem is that I can do it, and I can do it in a lot less than the 40 hours that Conrad is talking about. But there's none of the education that goes on. And so I hand this to my client and I tell them, okay, now go get yourself an accountant and be sure you're doing the right thing, right? But they haven't gone through the pain of actually doing it because I did it for them and they didn't get any of that education. And what I would encourage all of you, whether you're going to do a short form or not even do make it all the way to 501c3. If you are getting to the phase where you're going to start to look at donations, it would be a really good practice to actually sit down and go through the long form 501c3 application. You will learn a lot.
All right. Thank you for that. I do have a question here for Dr. Vine as well. You've mentioned how LCI can be used to receive donations, and then LCI will send a receipt to the donors, and then the money comes to the people. Could you elaborate a little bit on that for the people who may be thinking about becoming a member of LCI?
Well, my understanding is, and maybe I'm wrong in this, is that LCI is incorporated, I think, in the state of Arkansas, and it has already filed its Form 1023 for tax exempt status. This means that LCI is able to give out tax deductible receipts even before it's arrived, on the assumption that the 501c3 will be approved. And so people, if somebody wants to make a significant donation to your nonprofit, it'll be, and they want a tax deductible receipt, and you don't have 501c3 status, if your ministry is a part of under the LCI umbrella, that donation can be made to LCI. LCI would issue the tax deductible receipt, and then the LCI would appropriate that fund to your local nonprofit, not to you personally, but to your local nonprofit, which has no 501c3 status, for use on a defined purpose. And so your nonprofit would be recipient of a grant from LCI equivalent to what the donation was, and the donor gets their tax deductible receipt. Maybe Jonathan can add further comments on that. That's how at least I think it should work. I'm not sure if it is working that way, but because this is all getting up and running, but I think that's the intent, Jonathan. And maybe you can comment further.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that. First of all, let me tell you something. Running the nonprofit is really quite a chore, and one of the things that I would say is, the way we're planning this and what we're doing right now is we have formed a partnership with another nonprofit that actually specializes in this activity, because this activity is actually a little bit technical. And what we're going through, and this is a good lesson for anyone who's going into ministry, we formed a partnership with another nonprofit, and they will actually be issuing the receipt, not LCI. And if you need this service, you'll work through us to get on board with that nonprofit. And what we're doing is we're going through a mentoring process where we're learning from this other nonprofit that does this as their sole mission. And we're learning from them, and we will make the decision as we grow as to whether we bring this in-house or if we continue to partner with that organization.
Okay. All right. I think that's the question. There's another question in the chat, but it seems like that's the one we were just talking about. Pastor Conrad Vine mentioned operating under LCI. How may we do this as a joint venture nonprofit? Yeah, I think that's what you just spoke about.
Yeah, so legally what it would be a joint venture. Mm-hmm. And legally your finances would exist underneath the nonprofit. It would be a joint venture with both LCI and the nonprofit that we've partnered with for this. And you would have to fill out an application, get your ministry approved. There's going to be two kinds of basic relationships you can have with us. One would be for kind of an ongoing situation where, like, if you wanted to have a ministry that was funded and operated on an ongoing thing. The other would be for a one-off project. Like, let's say you want to host an event and you need to have a nonprofit status to do that. Then you would sign up for a one-off event. And it doesn't really matter. You don't have to be incorporated at all. You can just be an individual, and we'll work with you as to how to set up things. But you'll have to do things like any other, like if you've ever worked with nonprofits where they say, we want a receipt. And so you'd have to be doing that because we'll be doing bookkeeping. So there's going to have to be receipts, and it may be a situation where there's reimbursements. If you are going to operate in a way where you don't want to use reimbursements, where you want to just pay for things, where maybe you have a bank account, we can do that as well. Although whenever you get in this kind of an arrangement, it's important not to have a really high throughput, like of too many transactions. And we can talk about this. These are all details. And then what we do, and we're working out the actual percentages, but there is a percentage cost to your budget that would go to pay the overhead for the accounting that we'll be doing.
All right. Thank you so much for that one. Any other questions in the chat? All right. Yeah, nothing else.
Can I just add something, Brother James? I think this conversation shows, and the Hot Springs, Arkansas talk that Brother Zirkle did with myself and Daniel Bakayoko, that people have great ministry ideas, but putting the architecture in place to have sustainable and growing ministry is another question altogether. And I would encourage everybody on this call, please come to the Loud Cry convention this year in Northeast Georgia, because there will be breakout sessions and Q&A sessions, and these are some of the topics that we can have further discussions on. And on these kind of things, you can't afford to get it wrong. You have to get it right. Once you have a financial scandal and it hits your nonprofit, you're in real trouble going forward. And so come to the convention, meet with people who've already trodden this path before you, and just pick their brains over meal or in the quiet corner, and learn to avoid the pitfalls that sometimes we fall into unintentionally.
All right. The date for the convention, by the way, is going to be April the 10th to the 12th. So book that date.
Yes. Hey, Conrad, on your website, you have it 9th through 11th. You might want to change it to 10 through 12.
Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
10 through 12?
Yeah. That should be on our website as well, correct?
Okay.
Yeah, it should be updated. I'll make sure I put a post on that on my website so that I publish it on my end as well.
I want to add one little word of wisdom before we go. I've been learning something, and this has been a hard thing for me to learn. I was listening to a podcast, and it was talking about New Year's resolutions. And, as we're recording this, it's January 4th, so New Year's resolutions are a big thing. Let me tell you one of the things that I think I learned that this podcast said, and that I looked at my own life, and I realized, yes, that's the right wisdom, and this is the right thing. Everybody's busy. And at least if you're going somewhere in life, you're probably pretty busy. And I'm sure anyone that's contemplating a ministry that's got a chance of going at it, you're busy. You're that kind of person, right? Here's the thing. Whenever you plan on doing something new, you also need to plan on eliminating something out of your life. Because if you go back and look at last year, were you busy last year? You probably were. And so I would say that everyone who's contemplating a new ministry like this, you have to make space for it, and don't feel bad, because a lot of times I think we make these commitments, we make these plans. At least this is something that I do. So this is maybe just advice for me, and that is we just add it on top of everything else we're doing, and then we find ourselves going along, and suddenly we realize that we can't juggle everything. And so you need to also realize you only have so many hours in a day, and to let go of something as you're making your move towards ministry.
Amen. Amen. I want to also say thank you, Dr. Vine, for saying this. You were speaking to me, especially when we decided to go independent this year, my wife and I. It is a full-time job. I'm on the kitchen table making thumbnails, writing script, and she's like, my wife gets it, so she supports me, but she's like, okay, it's time to put away the phone, James. Let's go do something with the family. So I'm constantly working, and I know exactly what you're saying. And it is, once you make up your mind to go to a personal ministry, you have to actually commit yourself fully for you to see the success of it. And I can tell you, just the little podcast we got going on YouTube is a full-time commitment. Our entire house has been transformed. And that's how we know it's been successful, is because we give ourselves to it. And we really appreciate those counsels that you give as well. And every other week as well, we have those dates that I set with my wife now. I'm like, no ministry, nothing. It's just you and I. So very important to take time for the family and the children, separate from work and put everything else away. Yeah.
You end up living at work.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, nonstop.
Brother James, I've just noticed in the chat that somebody called iPad with 2 hearts, I think is a bookkeeper. And I think whoever iPad is, I think Sister Linnell DeRue on this call is thinking of finding a bookkeeper. Maybe you two can connect with each other directly in the chat and speak outside this meeting to see if serving as a bookkeeper for Sister Linnell's mission would be a blessing.
Amen.
Amen.
All right.
And just so you guys know, one of the things we are doing, I did put it in the chat, but our private Facebook page is going to come up for LCI members, and we'll have a bulletin board on there where people can offer their services to other ministries, or they can request needs, these kind of things, to have like a chat between LCI members to connect and work things out, like this thing that Conrad just did with the sister iPad and Linnell.
Yeah. And to one of the questions that was asked regarding the website and how to get visibility out there, Dr. Vine spoke about YouTube and so on. Justin and I did do something at LCI. It's on our, well, part of it was recorded, some of it were not recorded. We ran out of space on our storage, but we would like to do something again. So for those of you who are LCI member, we're going to come back, Advent Media Connect and Fair Haven Outpost, well, the Balanced View. We're gonna do a whole entire symposium of how to take your ministry online and make YouTube to work for you. Once you figure that one out, it will bring people to your website too. I notice our website has grown tremendously, over 300 to 400 views a day. So that once your YouTube is growing, automatically your website page will follow suit. So all of that will work perfectly fine with your blog as well. All right, Justin, I want to turn it over to you now.
All right. Well, thanks everyone again for joining us for our first episode here. We're going to go ahead and close with a word of prayer. Let's bow our heads. Father in heaven, Lord, we thank you so much for the time we spent here this evening. Much needed time to listen to the wisdom and experience of Dr. Vine, as well as Brother Zirkle, Lord. Father, oftentimes when we're dealing with spiritual matters, we forget that you are a practical God, and you advise us and counsel us to be skillful and knowledgeable in this area. We are told to not be slothful in business, dear God. So, Lord, please give wisdom to your people as they strive to do your work in a efficient and organized way, dear Lord, that we would not bring shame to your name, dear God. So please bless us all as we depart, but I pray you'd bring us back again for another episode where we can once again receive counsel, wisdom, and knowledge. We ask all these things, Lord. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
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 Okay, last thing, 2 weeks, not this coming Sunday, but the next Sunday, I think it's 18th. We have our brother from the house. What's his from the home church plant?
Milton Adams.
Milton Adams, yes. Milton Adams will be with us 2 Sundays from now, 4 p.m. Eastern.
All right. Thank you so much.
God bless.
Thank you.
All right. God bless you, everyone. Bye-bye.